Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Liverpool.com podcast with myself, Michael Plant, and today I am joined by Richard Garnett, where we are going to be discussing today the latest Liverpool transfer news. Plenty going on over the last couple of days involving the Reds and potentially bringing in a new centre forward. But before we get into all that, Richard, how are you, mate?
I'm not too bad, mate. I'm joining you from the Blood Red podcast studio today. A bit of an upgrade in my surroundings for the day. Feel a little bit like Noel Edmonds in his Radio 1 days here, but half of our viewers probably won't even know who he is. But don't worry, you're not missing too much. Yeah, but I'm all good, mate. Yeah, got a couple of weeks in the office here, and then on my holidays in Spain soon. So looking forward to that.
Well, it's almost as if we rehearsed this, because if you're going on holiday, this is an important message that we have from our sponsors, NordVPN. A word and shout out to them before we get going today. NordVPN, who have a new app available for download, which will allow you reliable and affordable internet access on your trip abroad. Sealy is a new eSIM service app brought to you by the creators of NordVPN. Here you can choose from several affordable eSIM data plans in over 200 destinations. And with Sealy eSIM, you can always have a connection when needed. Download Sealy in your app store and use our code BLOODRED at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off on your first purchase. For further information, please go to our website, to our episode description box for further details and click on the link sealy.com/bloodred. So all this talk of eSIMs, international travel, brings us neatly onto conversations of the transfer window and the transfer market. And there is plenty going on, as I mentioned, in regards to Liverpool. I think before we do get into that, I just want to say a little word, just that we are still very aware when we're talking about everything going on at the moment with Liverpool and transfers, particularly in the centre forward area, that we're still very aware of the sensitivities surrounding Liverpool and, of course, the Jota and the tragic passing 2 weeks ago. And for some people, it may still be too soon to move on to be thinking about transfers and stories of that nature. But for us as journalists, we're always kind of across the latest news and always have to report on the latest ongoings, I suppose, around the club. So I hope no one takes it as any sign of insensitivity or the fact that we've moved on from talking maybe quite as much about the Jota stuff that we did a few weeks ago, but it's still very much in our minds at Liverpool.com, and that is seen across our reporting across the website. But with that in mind, Rich, it does bring us on to our discussion of centre forwards and Liverpool's moves in the transfer market. So it's been a really busy 24 hours or so in that regard, because yesterday the news broke that Liverpool have made kind of an unofficial approach to Newcastle to inquire, I suppose, about the availability of Alexander Isak, of course, the Swedish centre forward, who is probably the best striker on the market this summer, you would have to say. But in the last hour or so, before we started recording on Wednesday afternoon, there was news from The Athletic that Liverpool have made an approach to Eintracht Frankfurt to see about the availability of Isak Ekitike. So a lot of balls in the air. And of course, the complication is as well in all of that Newcastle themselves are interested in Ekitike and are making moves in that regard. So before we get into all that, Rich, where do we begin even talking about this? And what are your thoughts of the news, I suppose, over the last 24 and a bit hours?
Well, I can feel the fume from St. James's Park already, to be honest with you, because these aren't my words, but the words we've heard sort of banded around social media a lot in the last sort of 24 hours. There seems to be a bit of a power play undergoing from Liverpool at the moment in terms of flexing their transfer muscles and playing what looks like a fairly smart game, to be honest with you. So Alexander Isak is, for my money, the best sort of natural centre forward in the Premier League. He had an excellent season last year and really looked like a player that would really suit Liverpool's style of play and could potentially be a focal point of it in years to come if there could be a possibility of a signing. Now, Newcastle have obviously issued a bit of a hands-off warning. If you speak to their fans, or even their sort of like local reporters and whatnot, you get exactly the same answer. But money talks in football, as we know these days. It's a business these days. It's not just a sport. Whether you like it or not, that's just the lay of the land. And Liverpool are in a position where they can go after the players that they really want and put big money in the direction of those clubs. They've already done it once this pre-season with Florian Wirtz. That's a deal that we probably weren't predicting before the end of last season, but has now been completed. And now they appear to have moved their attention to that centre-forward spot, and with a sort of a bombshell approach, really, for Isak, which, if rumours are to be believed, and the feeling that the player himself might actually quite fancy it, that puts Newcastle, I would say, in a little bit of a position of weakness. But of course, he's their player. They can hold on to him if they want to. He's under contract, and unless the lay of the land changes, he will remain a Newcastle player. However, the reported interest in Ekitike is interesting, isn't it? Because the official position from Newcastle is that they would like the two to play alongside each other. That has been poo-pooed by many an observer on social media, pointing out that they're very unlikely to sort of change the way that Eddie Howe sets his team up to play with two strikers. It's also even less likely that one would be seen as cover for the other. And both players appear to play a fairly in a similar style with similar movements and whatnot, which has been, excellent reported on elsewhere. So that doesn't look like it really stacks up. Now, Liverpool, in this latest report, are supposedly approached Frankfurt about Ekitike. And the question now is, do they really want him, or is the message they're saying to Newcastle is, well, we want to sign Alexander Isak, and you've got an interest in Ekitike. If you don't let us sign Isak, we're going to go after your other target. And then Isak will no longer be a target for Liverpool, and you will not receive somewhere between 120 to 150 million pounds sterling. And will his value hold up at that level in future transfer windows? Nobody knows, but it's fair to say they've probably got the peak amount for him at this point. And if he wants to leave, is now the right time for Newcastle to cut the losses on him and say, okay, Liverpool, let's try and do a deal. So absolutely fascinating dynamic. And I wouldn't want to call which way it was going at the moment, but Liverpool despite having neither player, Liverpool appear to be holding a lot of cards in this ongoing saga.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. And I think that Liverpool, given their position at the moment, you have to strengthen from a position of power. And Liverpool at the moment very much are the dominant side in the Premier League and are, I suppose, exerting that force a little bit. And as you say, are holding all the cards, really. And I think that, there are a number of really interesting elements to this, and I don't think there's any coincidence, the timing of this, that Newcastle moved for Ekitike, that so quickly suddenly the Isak and the Ekitike stories come out. And I think just going back to the Isak story, it is important to mention, I can't remember if I did say this, there's been no official bid for Isak from the club. It's more of a general sense of reaching out to Newcastle to gauge his availability, but you do feel like Liverpool wouldn't be doing that if they felt there was absolutely no chance of getting Isak. And that is very much Newcastle's stance. Now, these stances can change, as we know. They can be, I suppose, used as negotiating tools rather than really sometimes a reflection of how the club really feel. And I do think that from Liverpool's perspective, they might look at this and think that Newcastle could actually be tempted to cash in. And Newcastle have really struggled with PSR over the last couple of years. They have found it really difficult to push on financially. They might view this as an opportunity to accept that at some point Isak will leave, that maybe now is the point to cash in when perhaps the interest is highest, that he's got 3 years left in his contract, that perhaps this time in 12 months, I certainly would be surprised if the interest wasn't there, but the price will have dropped. You suspect he'll be a year older, let's say a year less on his contract. And perhaps there might be a thought from Newcastle that actually now is the ideal opportunity to move Isak on, take this huge profit, bring in Ekitike, a striker who has been linked with all the top clubs in the Premier League this summer. Arsenal, Chelsea. I don't know if we count Manchester United as a top club. I don't think we do we? But
they're well known.
Yeah, they've got a big fan base. And so they actually, could almost be seen as a little bit of a coup, really, in an odd way for Newcastle to bring in Ekitike as the replacement for Isak. That this might be the best case scenario for Newcastle, which is really interesting. And then perhaps they can go and strengthen elsewhere in the market. That's just my opinion. I suspect that Newcastle fans' opinions might differ. I certainly agree with you that the thought of playing both Ekitike and Isak together just feels unlikely for a variety of reasons. But, and as you actually mentioned as well, I've been reported elsewhere, they're very similar types of players. They're athletic. They like to play the front foot. They like to drop into the wide areas and dribble with the ball. I can't envisage a scenario where they've got the two players doing the exact same job. And it's so rare to see two centre-forwards play these days anyway, let alone two centre-forwards who do very similar jobs. That wouldn't have been the case even when 4-4-2 was the prevalent formation in the Premier League. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic. And I do think we're going to get real movement on this story in the next couple of days. I think that if we meet back up this time next week to talk about things on the Liverpool.com podcast, we'll be talking about a completely different, I suppose, background to Liverpool's transfer negotiations and how the squad is looking. But I suppose a couple of questions in to chuck at you, Rich. I suppose the first one being, given that the reported figure is in around 120 million, the talk of for Isak, or at least as a starting figure, how big would it be for Liverpool to be breaking their transfer record twice in the one summer, perhaps actually breaking the British record transfer twice in one summer as well? And how important do you think it is to get Isak rather than Ekitike? Or I suppose to word it in another way, how much of a downgrade do you think Ekitike would be on Isak?
Okay. I think just one point I wanted to make while it's still in my mind before we got onto sort of Liverpool's eye-watering transfer spend is that I think Newcastle signed Isak for about £63 million, or reportedly £63 million on a 6-year contract. And I read a lot of Dave Powell's Business of Football stuff, so I've learned a little bit about amortization of transfer fees. So if you've got a 60, this is the way I understand it. So if I've got this wrong, apologies, Dave. But if you pay £63 million for a player and then it's on a 6-year contract, so in terms of your PSR spend, your profit and sustainability rules, that transfer fee amortizes over 6 years. So basically, you're effectively in your accounts, it would be around about 10 million for each year that he's there. So I think he's in his third. Is he in the third or fourth season? How many years has Nunes been there? He's been there 3 seasons.
Nunes moved in 2022.
2020, yeah. So that's so Nunes has been there. That's 3 seasons, isn't it? Yeah, 22, 23, 24.
That's I can do that.
I had to count my fingers there. I think he's 3. I think that's 3 seasons. I feel very pressured now, Michael. 3 seasons, I think. So Isak moved at the same time, didn't he? Around about give or take a month. So he'll have been there about 3 years. So that's about £30 million amortized off his transfer fee. So if they were to sell Isak to Liverpool for, let's say, £120 million, in terms of their PSR accounts, that would be a profit of about 90 million, which they can then reinvest in other players. Okay, so Ekitike, I think they've sort of around about £85 million being banded about for him, something like that. So if that's the case, selling Isak will cover the cost of buying Hugo Ekitike with no negative impact on their PSR accounts. That is the way I see that going, which means that could be a goer in terms of letting Liverpool buy Alexander Isak. I did not imagine I was going to go down the accounts road when I started this podcast, Mike, but here we are. So there's a possibility there. In terms of Liverpool's spend. This is unprecedented. Okay, in the time that I've been going to Anfield since like the mid '80s, late '80s, and obviously Liverpool were top of the tree then, but this is sort of like a pre-Premier League era, and before the Premier League was the richest league in the world, and during that period of the Premier League's financial dominance, Liverpool have never been the absolute top dogs. They've never been the biggest spenders. You've had your Chelseas, you've had your Man Cities, you've had your Man United in the dominant era. All those type of clubs have been able to see a player and say, we're going to go and get them and pay the money. And all relatively speaking to the time, the decade that it was in, they would spend the big money to go and get those players. All of a sudden, for the first time, Liverpool really look like they're doing that now. I mean, the money they just went and got Florian Wirtz for was just wild. It's just not what we expected. I mean, the season before, they bought Federico Chiesa on a bargain and then didn't buy anyone else. 6 months before that, Arthur Milo on a loan, and all lots of wheeler dealing. But this doesn't look like wheeler dealing, does it? You know what I mean? This is big money stuff. So, but from reading Dave Powell's stuff, they have the PSR capacity to do it. So if they want to go and spend money, or break the record transfer fee again, they have the capacity to do it. And if this sort of game that appears to be unfolding with Newcastle around making an approach for what is understood to be their own top target, it could well lead to Liverpool signing Isak. And if that doesn't happen, well, maybe they will go for Ekitike, unless it's a little bit of posturing. We can't be certain. To answer your second question, I know plenty about Isak because I've watched him play firsthand. He looked the business as soon as he came in. Really came in around the same time as Núñez. Just for me personally, just looked like an all-round better technical player, a good finisher, and the type of player I like. So I've always liked Isak, and that sort of my sort of fondness for him has only been sort of certified by what he's done in the last 12 months with Newcastle. So there's no doubt in my mind he's the number one target. I know less about Ekitike. I know he's been, he's done really well with Frankfurt and has shot to prominence as one of Europe's sort of top targets in the same position. I think he's a couple of years younger than Isak. He's only scored 50 career goals. I think Isak's got about 139, and goals pay the rent, as they used to say. So that is something to take into consideration. So I don't think it'd be the end of the world if we ended up going the other way to sign. What we can probably say is not Liverpool's top target, but I think certainly the plan is to try and get Alexander Isak as that first choice, and I would certainly agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and I just think that Isak, I mean, I was going to say be the final piece of the puzzle. I don't quite know if it is that, but he would just be almost the guarantee that you could ever want in terms of a goal scorer. I think with Ekitike, there will be a bit of a risk. A player moving to the Premier League for the first time, there's always a period of adaptation, I think. Well, more often than not, there's a period of adaptation. And you just never know with a striker coming up from abroad. I mean, it doesn't feel that long ago that Andrei Shevchenko signed for Chelsea, and we were all convinced that they had signed the best striker in the world and it was all going to kick off from there. And it never did for him. And there's probably more recent references than that. But, the point still stands that I think there are top quality strikers out there who do struggle to adapt to the physicality of the Premier League. And Isak, I mean, you referred to him as the best striker in the Premier League. I mean, I think Erling Haaland might have something to say about that. But apart from Erling Haaland, I absolutely take that point and would agree that he is just head and shoulders for me above the rest. And Matt, who's a regular, of course, on the podcast, he has spoken all summer about how in his eyes, he doesn't feel there is a standout striker in the market, excluding Isak, and the Isak is just so far ahead of everyone else. And if they could bring him in, I mean, he's 25, you're signing a striker for the next 6-7 years. The way players are going as well now and how they're maintaining their body, who knows, even perhaps a little bit longer than that. He ticks all the boxes in terms of what you want from a striker. He's athletic, he just needs a proven goal scorer. He can score with his right foot, his left foot, header, score from distance, can stretch defence, can come short, can play into the wide channels. He is just everything you would want from a striker, and it would be, as you said, such a statement of intent from Liverpool. Firstly, to go and break the transfer market or the transfer record twice in the one summer, but also to really flex their muscles and say, we are the best club in the land. We've attracted one of the best young attacking players from overseas. And we've gone and taken the best striker on the market as well and paid significantly for that. Now, I suspect that it would come back in terms of spending to not sort of bite them, but it would impact future windows. And I can't imagine FSG, if they were to go and get Isak and Wirtz in the same summer, going and doing the same again next summer. But it would be a hugely interesting and prospect, and I'm sure one of the Liverpool fans are kind of salivating at the thought of having both of those players in their team. But we will be across it over the next couple of days, potentially, but weeks as well if it does drag on that far. But yeah, even as a non-Liverpool fan who covers the club, the thought of seeing those two players play together would be so interesting to see how it goes. But
FSG, previously they've shown that when the right player is available, they will go after them and they will spend big money on them. Obviously, we've seen that in the past with Van Dijk and Alisson, just to call out the obvious ones. And if they think this is the time to strike, which I guess they do, because otherwise they wouldn't have inquired, then they're ready to move on it. And I suppose just taking that theory into account does make you wonder, if they don't get the target that they want, will they bother going for the second choice or the third choice, or stick with where they are? I think in this time round, probably they would go for another target, but there's no doubt who their sort of top target is, and I dare say in a polite manner they're going to be pretty aggressive about going about achieving their goals.
And I asked you, how much of a downgrade could it be to Ekitike? I don't know is the answer to that, but what I do think is that Isak is just the absolute guarantee and would be the dream player that Liverpool fans want to bring in this summer. So we'll wait and see.
One of our Everton reporters said to me in the office the other week, if Liverpool sign Isak, I give up. So that shows you what other people think about the idea of him potentially joining this Premier League Championship winning team.
Well, I felt going into the summer that I was confident that Liverpool would win the title this season upcoming. I felt even more so after the signing of Wirtz. I think if they brought Isak in, I mean, the bookmakers might start paying out already, mightn't it? But maybe that's probably a bit strong. But yeah, you take the point that they just strong favourites to win the title, if so.
The only thing that concerns me is that there's a lot of changes happening. A lot of change. 2 new fullbacks. Obviously, Wirtz is going to come in and change the dynamic in that sort of link between midfield and attack. And you could get a new centre forward in, and there's other people that are going to leave as well. That's inevitable, isn't it? So there's a lot of change going on. So and don't get me wrong, I've been happy with all the players that have come in so far, and I'll be even happier if Isak comes in as well. But there is a lot of change at the moment, and I just hope that they can all adapt, because it is a learning curve. But by that same token, Arne Slot won the Premier League with Jurgen Klopp's side, and now he wants to build one in his own image. So it's exciting times.
And that's the fascinating thing, I think, of going into this season, and a point I've touched on a couple of times over the podcast over the next few weeks, or over the last few weeks. The fullbacks are going to play completely different this season. It's going to be different having a number 10 in Wirtz, assuming he does play in that role, with Szoboszlai playing deeper potentially. It's going to be a very different team next season. I think we're all intrigued to see how it does pan out, but that's probably a topic and a conversation for another podcast, I suspect, because in the midst of all this transfer news about strikers and players that could be coming in, there's also talk of a player potentially leaving for big sum of money. And that's because Bayern Munich yesterday saw a bid knocked back, I suppose, from Liverpool for Luis Diaz. A bid of around £59 million was rejected from Liverpool, who view the player at around the €100 million mark. I can't remember how much that is in pound off the top of my head, but I think it's kind of 85, isn't it, in around that figure? And Liverpool very much holding to that valuation and see it as they are not planning in any way to sell the player at all going into, well, what are we now? Last month and a half of the market. So it's a really intriguing aspect of this window that Liverpool, while they are trying to bring in a centre forward, they also have a player who it seems is quite keen to move on. And this Diaz story is running on and on. It's this transfer saga that probably Liverpool don't want, but he's just there in the background and ticking away. Obviously, Diaz had interest from Barcelona this summer, and Liverpool, when there was an approach, they immediately knocked that back. There's, of course, been interest from Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia, and Liverpool, as I said earlier, standing to this stance. They are not going to let him go at all. So I just want to, Rich, firstly, what were your thoughts when you heard of this bid yesterday, and what are your views on Liverpool's stance that they are not planning to sell the player?
Well, again, there's a couple of bits to this, really, isn't there? Because I'm a Luis Diaz fan. I would like to see us retain him. I think he can form, or already forms, an important part of Liverpool's attacking trio, and I don't see that having to change, to be honest. If you got him on one side, Salah on the other, Wirtz in the 10, could have Isak lead in the middle. That's a pretty formidable attacking lineup for any team to face, I would say. And you got Cody Gakpo there as well, but Gakpo and Diaz are different players, and they bring, different qualities when they play, even though they often play the same sort of position. That they bring, a plan A and a plan B in a way, and which is which you can decide for yourself. But if you're Luis Diaz, you've got to take one thing into account. They haven't given him a new contract. They haven't offered him a new contract. I don't think he's one of the higher earners at the club. So when he sits down with his agent and he's like, right, what does the future look like? Well, the first thing they look at is, well, we've got this contract for Liverpool. Yes, we get paid well, but this player gets paid X amount. This player gets paid X amount. Why aren't I being offered that? Apparently, I'm an important player in this side. I'm not for sale. So why wouldn't you offer me a new contract? They haven't offered them a new contract, which says to me, this player is not for sale, but meet this price, and then he is for sale. So it's difficult to believe that he's not for sale if you're not going to give him a new contract, which reaffirms the club's commitment to him, never mind him reaffirming his commitment to them. So we know he's always fancied Barcelona. That's not much of a secret, I don't think. Lots of South American players have an ultimate goal to play for Barcelona or Real Madrid, and that will probably always be the case. But if Liverpool don't offer him a new contract, then it is natural that he could be tempted to move elsewhere. Where Bayern Munich fit in that, I'm not really sure. I guess Bayern Munich would offer Diaz a better contract that he's on now. Otherwise, why would he move? Wouldn't make sense. He's a key player in Liverpool's Premier League winning side, and the club apparently want to keep him. So I would like to keep him, but if the club aren't prepared to offer him a new contract at some point, I think within the next 12 months, I think it's likely that he's going to leave. If it's not in this window, then in the next summer window.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a bit of kind of posturing from all parties, isn't there, really? I mean, Diaz has been quite outspoken on various media interviews, even before the season ended, saying the club and I are going to sit down and discuss a contract. Well, the club's view is that they are not planning to sit down and discuss a contract with him and never were. So, and then obviously Diaz has come out and spoken about his future in I think 2 interviews in the last 10 days or so that... Yeah, I suspect I haven't really done him any favours, to be honest. And I think he should probably just kind of focus on, working in pre-season and hoping that the offer does come. Because I think from Liverpool's perspective as well, they look at certain players in the market this summer. Kudus, who went for about 55 million. Cunha, who went for 63. João Pedro, I think, was somewhere in the middle and around the 60 mark. And they look at Diaz and think, well, He is a Premier League winner, an established star man for Colombia, one of the obviously the biggest South American nations, who will probably be competing at the World Cup next year. And I think only Mohamed Salah played more games than Diaz last season. He's a vital player who can play across all three positions up front. And Liverpool stand says, look, this is the valuation. If you want to pay it, okay, then we'll talk. But if you don't want to pay it, then he's not for sale. And I think, Liverpool's stance has always been that he is just not for sale. I think every player is not for sale until a certain offer comes, and then he might be for sale. But I think it is interesting that you made the point very well that if you're Diaz, you're thinking, well, it does put him in a little bit of a difficult position because, listen, footballers are fantastically paid, and I think we'd all bite his hand off for that salary, or a quarter of that salary or a tenth of that salary, who knows? But at the end of the day, when he's in a dressing room and he looks around and all these other players are being paid significantly more, well, that will frustrate him, and that will be a bone of contention. And ultimately, the club aren't sitting down at the moment anyway and discussing a new contract with him, and also not allowing him to, not accepting offers that have so far been offered from Bayern. And I don't think Barcelona actually made an official offer, but there was certainly interest has been suggested from their camp. I think that if they are sticking to this in around 85 million valuation, I think the only offer really is going to be Saudi Arabia. I think that's the only way that anyone is going to match that bid. Bayern Munich, famously don't tend to spend that sort of money. Barcelona, never really know with Barcelona's finances, and things do seem to have settled down a little bit in that regard, but you wouldn't be confident of Barcelona having that sort of money to stump up as well. So it's a really interesting dynamic heading into the window. And it would, if Liverpool were to lose Diaz, it'd be a player in a position they would need to replace, I think, because I just don't think they have the options in the depth in the wide area if he was to leave. Obviously, they have Cody Gakpo, who for me is probably still first choice in that wide left position, in my opinion, anyway. Then you've obviously got Salah off the right. You've got Keys. What role does he play? Frimpong is back up. He's still really a right back, isn't he, as well? So they lack the depth, and if they were to allow Diaz to leave, it would certainly be a player that would have to be replaced. So, yeah, interesting one going into the final weeks of the, not the final weeks, the final kind of month and a half of the window. But, Rich, just wanted to bring you then, kind of as we come towards the end of this podcast, any thoughts on where else Arne Slot and Richard Hughes need to look in this squad before the end of the market?
Well, the obvious one, I think, is at centre-back, because obviously Jarell Quansah has now gone to Bayer Leverkusen, and that leaves him with three senior centre-backs, and one of those centre-backs, Ibrahim Konate, has only got 12 months left on his contract, and unless he signs a new deal, and we're back in the contract table. No. Unless he signs a new deal, he could leave in 12 months' time in the same vein as Trent Alexander-Arnold, and he's been linked with Real Madrid himself. That is not something that Liverpool fans want to see repeated, and I dare say the club wouldn't want that to happen either. Konate is a great player. He's also a saleable asset. So you either tie down his future, or I think you need to move him on for good money or the best money you can get with a year left on his contract, and bring in a replacement. And obviously there was talk about Mark Gahey at Crystal Palace, but that's gone a little bit quiet at the moment. But either way, they need to bring at least one centre-back in and either sort of contract with Konate or bring in another. So that is the area that most concerns me at the moment. You can start a season like this, but as we saw a few years ago under Jurgen Klopp when he let, I think it was Dejan Lovren leave, if you haven't got all your ducks in a row, if a couple of those ducks are poorly, you could be going quackers.
Hey.
Didn't plan that pun. Just rolls off the tongue, Mike.
Or the bell.
Or the bell, yeah. Oh, why didn't I think of that? yeah. But yeah, they all jokes aside, they do need to sort out the centre back situation. It might not be as exciting as getting a new centre forward is, but it's something that definitely needs to be addressed before the season gets underway.
It might not be as exciting as a centre forward, but it's as important, certainly. And I think that when you also consider that Virgil van Dijk, who is 34 now, and has got 2 years left in his contract, of course. We're not talking about Virgil van Dijk's contract, I can assure you of that, because we definitely have spoken enough about that. But look, I mean, at some point in the Liverpool have already got to be starting to think about long-term planning and succession planning at centre-back in that regard. But I would tentatively disagree with you, if I'm honest, about Konate. I think they should hold on to him regardless and should keep him around for another year, because I think they've got to bring in at least one centre-back anyway. I think to bring in two would be a lot. And actually, you mentioned it yourself. There's already been a lot of change this summer. And I think that Konate, while it would be a real shame from a Liverpool perspective if he was to leave, I think it would be important actually to get another good season out of him. And to maybe, you're slightly kicking the can down the road to a certain extent, but you're also not giving yourself too much to do in one summer. And obviously there's been a lot to sort out this summer in terms of the squad rebuild. And so I think they should, even if he isn't planning to sign a new contract, I think Konate should stay. But I think that once the centre-forward position is wrapped up, let's presume Diaz stays as well, and then centre-back is definitely the position that they need to strengthen, that's for sure.
Yeah, I get your reasoning on it. I understand it. And I suppose a lot of it comes down to what Konate's appetite is to stay at Anfield as well, because unlike the Diaz situation, I don't think it's, I don't think there's no contract on the table from Liverpool. I'm sure they would want to keep a player of that quality, very popular with the fan base. But I suppose you've got to weigh up, if he does leave on a 3 in 12 months' time, how can we sort of mitigate that in terms of a loss on the field and financially. But just a point about Van Dijk, and I've said this for weeks now, I know Van Dijk and Salah have signed new contracts, but the minute they signed those new contracts, the process of replacing those two players had to start, as far as I'm concerned, because whether they go beyond the contracts that they've signed now is very much up in the air, and the succession planning needs to be in place, and hopefully it already is.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point, and I think that they're always going to be thinking about long-term planning. I mean, we've already seen it to a certain extent with Alisson and his replacement in Mohamedashvili, who, of course, played for the first time at the weekend in a Liverpool shirt. But just back to Konate, I suppose one final point is the other aspect in all of this is there a player who can come in and immediately play at the same level as Konate, and I don't think there is actually to come in and immediately step into that void he would create in the team. So I think that for that reason, I do, as I say, think they're better to hold on to him for a year, except that there might be a chance that he leaves for free next summer. But hopefully, from Liverpool's perspective, he will stay on for another year. But on this kind of mega transfer roundup podcast, I think that is just about it. Rich, you got anything else to add? Or
no, and I don't know the word contract or anything about ducks ever again.
No, nothing. Well, hopefully we didn't ruffle too many feathers today anyway with our podcast. And yes, we'll be back next week for the latest Liverpool.com podcast. But from me, Michael, and from Rich, thank you very much for listening and watching.